I'll kind of, that was one of my announcements that I wanted to make, is that we are recording this meeting so that we can share it with those who couldn't be here, mostly the presentations and also for our note-taking purposes. My name is Jen Birchfield. I am the Natural Resource Planner with NERC. I'd like to go around and just kind of introduce our core working team, but I would also like to encourage everyone who is participating. If you would please, it would be very helpful for us. We want to document who's here. If you could please, in the chat, type your name and your affiliation, what organization you're with, or if you're a citizen of a certain community. If you could type those two things in the chat for us, that would be really helpful. As I said, my name's Jen Birchfield. I'll go ahead and introduce the rest of kind of the NERC working team. Kathy, would you like to go ahead and introduce yourself, Kathy Luther?
Sure, Jen. I'm Kathy Luther. I'm the Director of Environmental Programs here at NERC, and I've sort of been the overall grant manager, and I don't know what exactly I am on this project, but thank you all for coming.
Yep, thanks. And I will mention we also have Kevin Paulette with NERC on the line today. Kevin, would you like to introduce yourself quickly?
Sure. I'm Kevin. I'm a technical assistant here. I help out with pretty much anything that anyone else here at NERC needs help with, and that's kind of what I've been doing recently. So
great, thanks, Kevin. Anyone else on from NERC?
Oh, Floorbaum. I'm just giving technical support as well.
Yes,
thank you.
Of course, I know you're here, Floor. Sorry, thank you so much. Floor is doing our technical support and helped to set up this meeting.
I think that Thomas Dow just entered as well.
Yep.
Thomas, if you can hear us, we're just doing introductions. If you'd like to introduce yourself as part of the NERC team.
Hi, I'm Thomas Dow. I'm the Director of Transportation here at NERC.
Great, thanks. I think that's the NERC team. With that, I would like to, actually, I think that David, we are part of the NERC team as well. So David
Sure.
Clifford, would you like to introduce yourself and your actual title?
Absolutely, yeah. So hi, everyone. My name is David Clifford. I am the Climate Fellow with NERC. I had been working with NERC this summer with a fellowship program through the IU SPIA School of Public and Environmental Affairs. So I'm a graduate student there. I've been extended into the fall semester, so I'm going to be staying on to try to help out with the climate planning in the region. Very excited to do that, and really excited to kind of get into today's meeting to show everyone, what we're hoping to achieve with this. And I hope it'll be a good meeting. So yeah, I'm excited to stay on and get started. So Jen.
Great. Yep. And for those who have joined us since I first said it, we are encouraging participants to please introduce yourself, your name and your affiliation, be it an organization, a municipality, just the area where you live. Please introduce your name and your affiliation in the chat. And with that, I would like to turn it over to Kathy Sipple to introduce her team from Earth Charter Indiana.
Great, thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and start with Renee, since I've got some housekeeping duties and everything like that. Renee, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself first?
Hi, I'm Renee Prejean-Matenki, and I'm a resiliency coordinator with Earth Charter Indiana. My primary function in this effort is with marketing communications public relations for CAN, our climate action network.
Thank you, Renee. And back to me, I guess. I'm Kathy Sipple, and my title with Earth Charter Indiana is Senior Resiliency Coordinator. And I work with the whole region, though I do live in Valparaiso, and was really glad to have Renee join me in January. She's helped extend my reach. So without further ado, I just want to jump into a few housekeeping things, and then we're going to get oriented a little bit on where have we been, where are we going, before I turn it over to our key presenters today. In this effort of doing a regional planning Regional Climate Action Plan. I know there's been some resistance actually to the word climate. We are listening to what you say, and we have taken notes, and you have actually given us some notes. I'm going to go ahead and share some of those notes on screen. These are some notes that came out of our first meeting. We used a program called Jamboard, and we're going to be going back to that again today, actually. These are some things that bubbled up that didn't really belong in any particular board, but just some worry that the word climate can divide us a little bit, and people wanting to choose language that shows, you know, benefits, win-win. And I think there's just a real concern behind that, that political leadership not be offended by this choice of words. And also that we're trying to address a lot of different stakeholders in this outreach. And we just want you to know that we are really leaning into Indiana University's guidance with this. We're the first in Indiana Regional Climate Action Plan, and we've developed some branding around Climate Action Plan, and they very firmly feel like it is a climate action plan. However, there were some that suggested the word resilience, and when Renee and I introduced ourselves, we introduced ourselves as resiliency coordinators. So the more I thought about that, I'm like, you know what, we're doing a both and. It's not an either or, it's a both and. What we are doing in this work group with NERC, working in their domain, actually does address climate action planning. So we feel like to change that wording would just be a little bit disingenuous. At the same time, we realize there are a whole lot of new words that we're all getting familiar with. And I do believe that resiliency, you know, is very important. And Renee and I are actually tackling aspects of that. So we're going to lead one of the breakout sessions at the end of our time today. If you want to, you know, go into that wording and look at what those solutions look like a little bit more, then you may want to join us. In any case, we just want you to know that we are hearing you, and we go back and plan our meetings looking at your input. So the way that we are going to be dividing today, roughly in those breakout groups, will give you some idea to think about which one you want to join. Renee and I will be leading up a group that has to do more with community action and engagement. Jen and David are going to be talking to people about reduction strategies. A lot of these things captured here on screen, again, are from our first and second meetings that talk about all different aspects of that. And Kathy Luther has volunteered to lead a group that's around vulnerability. Now, looking at my notes and where I put them, you may say, that doesn't belong here. I had something else in mind. That's fine. A lot of these things do actually, you know, apply to multiple, you know, scenarios, and we can certainly have discussions about anything in any of those groups. So I just want to stop sharing for now and just let you know we are taking your feedback very seriously. And beyond that, we are also just looking to be as inclusive as possible. So these breakout groups give you a little bit of a decision which one you want to, you know, go down into and talk about further. Your notes will be captured. They will be, you know, encapsulated into this ongoing body of documentation that is taking place. And I also want to let you know that there is a website that still exists called NWIRegionResilience.org, where Renee has been doing a very good job of posting updates. And if you subscribe to follow updates there, you'll get information about these meeting notifications as well as meetings that are happening in the community. So anyway, we are listening and we are doing our best to develop new partnerships and role divisions so that we can best address this. But why you're all here, you answered that a little bit differently on the onset too, and all of your reasons are valid. The reason that NERC is here, I'm going to let Kathy and David tell you more about that, but they can provide the ongoing technical assistance for this project. Again, Renee and I can work maybe more on the community engagement. So I think together we are able to do more. Just a few housekeeping things before I turn it over to David. He's going to be our first presenter. Kathy, I think, is going to be our first presenter. Again, if you're on Zoom, we're going to ask that you remain muted until the Q&A session. If you feel comfortable unmuting and you'd like to speak your question aloud, that's fine. Or you can type it in chat. That might be a little bit easier just for us to queue up the questions and maybe you know, decide the order of how that makes sense and who will address them. But just know we will have a pretty robust Q&A section. And then of course, you're going to have a lot more chance for dialogue in the breakout groups. I don't see anybody joining by phone today, but if that happens later, Somebody help me remember. It's just really good if we can know who's actually in the room and you can rename yourself with your name. Doesn't look like that applies today. But anyway, it's not that we have you muted because we don't want to hear from you. We just want to preserve the quality of the recording. And if anybody's having issues with the technology, you can please reach out to me via chat and I will help you, along with any other organizer who introduced themselves at the beginning. I think that's it, Jen. Did I miss anything?
No, I think you've got it all, Kathy. I would just reiterate, in case some people joined us in the meantime, I'll probably repeat this a few times and type it in the chat. Please do, if you've joined us, we've asked everyone to please type their name and their affiliation, organization, community in the chat for us.
Okay, and let's see. David, are you now a presenter? Have you been
I should
given that?
be. I think so.
You have, okay, great. And so I think Kathy's got the first few slides. Kathy Luther, she's going to give us some wayfinding, I think, giving us some context. And Kathy, you are still muted. Do you know that?
I wasn't, and I'm not sure that David, do you want to pull up the whole thing since I only have the first
Sure.
two? Okay.
Sure.
Well,
So
wait, do you have the new one I just sent?
yes, I
Change
do.
my slide. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
No problem at all. Let me make sure we're okay on the share. One moment. Okay. Is this
Great.
what we're looking for, Kathy?
Yes, thank you.
Great.
So I just wanted to kind of set the stage, remind people where we're at and where we're going. As you can see here, I've made a slight modification to the standard ERI ICLEI climate action planning process to better reflect what we're trying to do here. I think that was one area that was causing some confusion among a lot of folks. So, you know, milestone one, the first step in the climate action process is to inventory emissions. That was completed in 2021 and with the baseline of 2017. The second step is to establish a target. We have a target for the region of a 63.4% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. Then the third step is to develop your climate action plan. I've modified that. What we're developing now is a regional climate action plan framework, which will provide a lot of the data, a lot of the kind of some decision matrices, and support for individual jurisdictions that want to develop their own climate action plan. I think that's an important distinction of what the product will be. To the extent, you know, we have a lot to do with that, like transportation. We have a strong influence on transportation. It might be more action plan oriented, but in general, the end result should defer to local communities. And then I've added a whole nother kind of step, a milestone 3.5, which is where this team that's doing the climate action plan framework will support the development of local climate action plans by cities, towns, counties, neighborhoods, school districts, I don't know, other organizations. And then once whatever climate plans get adopted, then implementation will go into step 4. So step 3.5 and step 4 can be, you know, a loop, or depending on how many folks decide to do it and then do it later, we can keep continuing to grow the number of entities with climate action plans, or whatever they want to call them. At that point, we will, as climate action plans get adopted or implemented, then NERC can take a regional role to look and evaluate our progress across the region. And we will also update the inventories every 5 years to see where we're at as a region. So that's kind of where we are in the process. And then earlier on, several meetings ago, I had shared with everyone a work plan. This work plan has been kind of a living document, but some of the things that we've been learning over the last 2 months, we did obviously start this work group start forming this work group in March, and this is our third meeting. And we have talked a lot about stakeholder engagement. We have actually, through the IU Environmental Resiliency Institute, had 2 training sessions with an expert in stakeholder engagement, and particularly in underserved communities. And we've had several meetings with them and discussions, and I think where we've landed is a really good place, where instead of trying to do as much retail, on the ground engagement for this big regional framework, that we will give all the tools to the local government so they will engage people on the ground for their individual climate action plans. That prevents us at the regional level from giving the appearance of, or actually, dictating to communities what they should do. We're trying to give you tools that will help you be part of the regional effort, not dictate to the communities what, you must do this and that. So the trainer was pretty enthusiastic about that. And we actually have the communication group that is going to meet later is thinking all about that even now and strategizing how that will work. So we did spend quite a bit of time on that to date. We have another thing that we heard, I think, from the first meeting. Some of the feedback was that our initial intent not to really talk about industrial emissions because we didn't have any control over them was somewhat dissatisfying to people. So, and some of what David's going to show, we are going to include them in our forecast because there are things that others do, for example, NIPSCO's plan, that will impact their emissions. And also many of them do have published decarbonization strategies. So we're going to do some forecasting, including those changes as well, so that we have a more quite frankly, I think some of the dabbling we've done at that has made me a little more optimistic than I might have been. So you'll see some of that today. And the other good news David mentioned is we do have the opportunity to extend him through the fall. So you might notice that the schedule is more or less expanded out to give us more time to work on the actual framework document and talk more with communities and state and source groups about how we want to do the strategies. So so we stretched it out a few more months, and I think so we're still going in the same direction. We're still going to accomplish the same things. But some of our effort will be on how to do stakeholder engagement around climate planning at the local level, and tools to do that, and how to decide your local goals and targets and priorities. So does anybody have any questions about that so far? No, silence falls over.
Okay, I have a question.
Okay.
And I do see
You know-
one question in the chat. Someone is interested in seeing the report for greenhouse gas emissions and how the target of 63% reduction was decided. And I think if you want to answer that kind of generally at this point, we can do that. But
Yeah.
I will make a note of that question and make sure that we follow up with the full answer.
Yes. So the target, the definition of the target is a science-based target, and we are using the one globe, one city, one planet, one city methodology, which basically adjusts. So the global target and the international agreements to keep the temperature change to 1.5 degrees Celsius, which I cannot tell you what that is in Fahrenheit, which I was supposed to have that number off the tip of my tongue. The scientific consensus on that is that globally we need a 50% reduction in emissions. The one city methodology takes that 50% and then adjusts it by a scale, basically an international development scale, so that developed countries have a larger percentage and less developed countries will have a smaller percentage. So then our 50% is adjusted up to 63% to account for historical emissions. Primarily, that's the purpose of that. I've been calling it prorating of the emission reduction targets. That said, many of the charts that David will show you will show both that 63.4% and the 50% globally based science-based emission reduction target. I hope that answers the question. And I can have more details. Like Jen said, we can email out more details.
Yeah, and I do want to reiterate that point, and maybe I didn't make it clear earlier when we were doing introductions. Type any questions you have in the chat, and in this time that we're not really unmuting as much, we can kind of start to accumulate those questions and review them. And anything that we can't adequately answer today in the time that we have, we will be sending out a document with kind of verified, detailed answers after the meeting.
I would say, regards to the inventory, we do have available the published inventory that was done in 2017, which included our 3 counties and 11 municipal inventories. We're somewhat still in the process of revising that to be one inventory for the whole region and combining everything. It turned out to be a lot more complicated than I thought, but the major sources have all been completed. Some of the minor ones I'm still tweaking for that, but it didn't really change anything in a material way for our region at this point. But we will be having that attached as an appendix, I think, to this climate action plan, how we put the combined regional one inventory together from the previous individual jurisdiction inventories.
Great.
That is all. If there aren't any other questions, I think it's time to turn over to David.
Great. Well, give me one moment, everyone, while I swap out for okay. Allow me one moment to share to. Okay. So I hope everyone is able to see this title screen. Please let me know if not. So hey everyone, my name is David Clifford. As both Kathys have mentioned, I'm the climate fellow with NERPC, and I've been extended into the fall. And so really what I've been working on is Kathy Luther and I and the rest of the NIPSCO team, or NERPC team, excuse me, are working on getting this regional climate action plan completed and off the ground. And so what we wanted to do today was to sort of really, as explicitly as we can, sort of outline what is it that we're hoping to provide as a resource to the region and to communities into the region, and also just update folks on how that work has gone this summer. And so what we wanted to talk about. So one thing that we wanted to kind of mention early on is that a regional climate action plan is still a bit atypical for these sorts of plans. As they're typically done at the city level, city or town level. Reasons for that is that the cities have more control over like budgetary and policy decisions and things they want to enact. But regional plans do exist. Kansas City metro area and Chicagoland are big examples of that. And so we wanted to try to mention to folks, what is the advantage of doing a regional climate plan, and what are we hoping to provide? And so I included some language here that I kind of wanted to highlight for folks. So obviously communities are connected by shared infrastructure, transportation, and energy systems, fundamental to our ability to respond to climate change. And so an overarching regional plan will realize economies of scale. We hope to provide guidance and benefits for all municipalities, something useful that everyone can use as they conduct their own as we've mentioned, whether you want to call it an energy savings plan, a sustainability plan, a climate action plan, we hope to provide assistance for local communities that want to do that. Obviously, and to that point, climate change is going to affect communities of all kinds, not just large cities and fast growing suburbs, which is where you see a lot of these sorts of plans taking place. So we plan to provide recommendations for communities of all kinds, whether it's a city, a town, unincorporated county land, whether it's growing or stable population, all different types. We want to try to be a resource for all those different sorts of communities. And so we plan to leverage the strengths of municipal governments to propose coordinated approaches, ways that municipalities can align resources and shared expertise to move the region towards a sustainable future, to try to identify the areas of largest emissions or the policies that communities can most readily coordinate on. Those are the types of things we're hoping to do. And so just to sort of put a finer point on it, what are we hoping to provide in our actual plan? Common objectives for the region. Kathy mentioned the common emission reduction objective. We have already provided for the region a greenhouse gas inventory and a business as usual emissions models. So if communities wanted to take on their own plan, that work has largely already been done for them. We hope to provide a wide range of policy proposals. So similar to what we've been talking about earlier, we don't want to have some like cookie cutter, you have to follow this set of policies. We recognize this is a very diverse region, and so we want to try to provide multiple policy recommendations for each type of emissions sector that a community could be responsible for. Another thing we're going to provide is a regional climate hazard assessment, similar to how climate change's effects don't stop at any one city limit. Neither do things like air pollution or flooding or heat islands. And so we want to try to provide a regional resource that communities can use if they wanted to do their own climate adaptation policies to changes that are already underway in our climate. One thing that I kind of wanted to give a special shout out for how this regional plan is going to work. So it seems to be best practice with regional plans to provide municipal actions along 3 different tracks, along 3 different levels of action that municipalities can take. And so we're going to adopt that policy as well. So recommendations that we're going to make are going to fall along 3 different policy levels of involvement. Local communities can lead. They can take actions that will lead by demonstrating low carbon operations, choices that they can take within their own purview. They can enact policies. So for instance, I mentioned streamlining solar codes. That's just a policy that a city or a community could pass. They could also encourage action through things like investments, financial incentives, creating paths and infrastructure. And so when we recommend our policies, they're going to kind of fall into those 3 buckets. I wanted to give an example of that. So this is the region of Kansas City, the Kansas City Municipal Region's Climate Action Plan. On the left there, you can see they recommend a host of policies for what is essentially commercial energy, buildings and cities. So you can see they list multiple different policy avenues that cities in their region could choose to take. And then on the right-hand side there, we just took one of their specific policy recommendations. They give a quick blurb about sort of what this policy entails. They demonstrate, they show examples of the level of involvement cities can take in enacting these sorts of policies. And they they give additional resources that cities can follow up on if they want to. And so we're really going to try to model, we're really going to try to emulate that sort of relationship with our local communities. We want to try to be a resource that communities can then build their own plans off of, the framework that Kathy Luther had mentioned. And so just to try to to sort of be a little bit more explicit about that, something we wanted to include, like municipalities are still best suited to lead on a few fronts, a few key fronts. One of those is ranking the priorities for reduction policy actions. So this is for like reducing emissions. Municipalities should still be the ones sort of leading on prioritizing what actions they want to take, passing those policies, things like that. They should be the ones doing that sort of intimate level planning. They should be conducting their own social vulnerability index. So for those that may not know, a vulnerability index is related to climate adaptation and climate hazard. And so we wanted to, would it be possible to email the slides? Oh, yes. Yes, Nancy, sorry, folks. I wanted to make sure I wasn't missing anything. Yes, Nancy, we can send that. And I do know that I'm covering a lot of ground here. So if folks need me to slow down or go back over a slide, I'd be more than happy to do that. So just sort of saying, like, municipalities should sort of be the leaders in developing their own direct plans over things they can make direct action over. So for instance, I mentioned the social vulnerability index. That relates to climate hazards like flooding. So they would need to be the ones identifying their own high value infrastructure and buildings and taking action on those fronts. So how our plan would relate to a local climate action, resiliency, whatever you want to call it, plan. Think of us as an outline and a resource provider. You can use the NERC cap as sort of a starting point. But we understand that factors like land development, budget, and existing infrastructure are going to pretty substantially affect what policies folks plan to adopt. And so we wanted to just sort of touch on what progress we've made towards that sort of goal. So we have begun drafting the NERC Climate Action Plan over this summer. We're actually using a template provided by our partners at ICLEI. And so the plan has been, the template was made for the city scale, but really it provides a lot of grounding and structure for writing an emissions inventory for greenhouse gases. It creates sections for including reduction strategies. So those are like policies by sector, whether it's transportation, residential energy, what have you. It provides a section on vulnerability and adaptation. And then also it provides a section for us to include a monitoring plan. And so we wanted to give an update or just sort of give an example. So this is what we're talking about with the template. So it's literally a document that provides a really good grounding for us to then insert our own plan. So we've begun drafting our regional climate action plan with our, like I say, with our partners at ICLEI, assisting us along the way with that. And so just to give you another example, so we would be able to include sections like transportation and land use and the types of reduction strategies we'd recommend for the region there. And so we've begun work on the actual draft itself. And so there are things that we plan to add to our regional cap plan, or to our regional plan. As I mentioned, the template that we're using is built for a city. So we want to try to add some things to that. So we're going to add the regional framework, that sort of explanation that I led with about like what we're doing here and how best to use this document. We think that's a really important way to sort of frame our plan and make sure that folks are getting the most use out of it that we can. We're going to include an industrial section in our cap plan. I appreciate that some folks had mentioned that in previous meetings, but we really looked at and we're going to get into this later. We looked at the industrial emissions that were coming from Northwest Indiana, and we felt that we really couldn't ignore that and that we had to speak to that. So we're going to include a pretty detailed industrial plan. We're going to modify the policy recommendations section. So we're going to try to make sure we have a lot of different policies for folks to choose from. Something that Kathy Luther has mentioned that we are going to include is we're going to have different menus of policies based on city type. So if you are a growing or declining community, if you are a suburban or industrial or city, we're going to have different lists of high priority actions that you can follow along with, that we would recommend for you. And then we're going to modify the climate hazard, the adaptation section for the regional scale. Something that we're also going to include in our plan is a federal financing and policy option plan. With the big news in the last few weeks about federal legislation being passed, and really the last few years, we thought we would be remiss if we didn't include just a resource in our plan about how municipalities can best take advantage of federal financing and programs. So those are some things that we're going to try to provide for folks in our plan. And so some other work we've been working on this summer. We've really completed our business as usual forecasts. I know Kathy has mentioned there's still some finishing touches on there, but I wanted to sort of, we've been able to get these nice visuals from our software program, ClearPath, to sort of look at the top picture there. What you're looking at is community emissions. So those are transportation and residential energy and commercial energy emissions. And so you can see, I want to point out the dotted dashed lines there. As Kathy mentioned, the red dashed line there is if we reduced emissions by 50%. The green line there is if we reduced it by the goal of 63.4% with the One Planet City Challenge. And the bottom one there, the biggest thing you'll notice is that includes industrial emissions. And then it also, in the transportation section, includes industrial rail. And so we notice, you can just see, if you notice on the y-axis there, it's orders of magnitude more emissions when you include those sources. And so looking at that, we felt that we couldn't ignore the industrial emissions section of our report. And so that's something that we're really excited to try to provide, or at least speak to with our plan. And so again, just sort of, this is sort of touching on things that we had worked on in June, or some things that we had gone over in June, but now we have the visuals to go along with that, as well as which sort of spells out how emissions are going to be affected over the next through the end of the decade. And so we've begun looking at different reduction strategies. Whenever you see reduction strategies, you can think of like policy recommendations and things. So you can see in these pictures, you can see that even with the business as usual plan, which is the top image there, you can see that emissions are decreasing. This is thanks to NIPSCO's retiring of different coal plants and bringing some wind and solar plans online. And so you can see that things are going down. But one thing we want to stress here is that even with those reductions coming online in Northwest Indiana over the next decade or so, we still wouldn't reach a 50% or 60% reduction. And so that's where these climate plans are coming in. So we have to try to identify high target, high level reduction strategies in order to meet those targets. And so an example I've pulled here, so our software allows us to really just model how much of an effect a certain amount of reduction would have on our community emissions. So what you're looking at in the second image there is that we looked at a high level target for what would happen if we reduce transportation emissions by 34%. And so what you can see is that the blue line with the original forecast has stayed the same, but you can see that over time, the amount of emissions is actually decreasing. And so one thing we use with this transportation target that we set was increasing, obviously, electric vehicles, but also increasing things like remote work and walking and biking in the region. And so we were able to model those different forms of transportation and what sort of effect they would have on the region. And so that is something that we're utilizing across all sectors. So something that I wanted to do here, we're able to pull out just residential energy and look at residential energy's emissions. So the top screen there is just business as usual. And then the second image there, you can see the emissions are decreasing drastically. And this is when we would include this list of policies over here on the right-hand side. So if the region was able to adopt strategies like residential heat pumps, an energy education program, low-income weatherization, and increased residential solar and more widespread LED adoption, you would see a substantial decrease in residential energy's emissions through the end of the decade. So this is the kind of when Kathy, Luther, or myself talk about, you know, reduction strategies or reduction planning or policy recommendations, this is what we're referring to. We're trying to look in the ClearPath software, how much reductions will each policy lead to. And so with that, we're going to be identifying high level or high target, high priority, if you will, strategies that we would encourage municipalities to adopt, because based on what we've been able to model in our software, those would have the largest impacts. So it's not going to be a comprehensive list, but it is going to, again, thinking of it as a resource, we're trying our best to identify the most high level, the high target emission strategies that we would most readily recommend. So that's sort of been the bulk of the work that we've been doing this summer, is trying to track down as many of those high level policies as we can. We've also been wanting to include pre-existing plans that are going to reduce emissions as much as possible. So for instance, we're trying to incorporate different transit projects that are set to come online through the 2030 and 2050 timelines. So for instance, the Westlake Corridor expansion and the projected reduction in VMT, the vehicle miles traveled, we're trying to incorporate that into our plan as well. And so just wanted to give these plans a shout out. The double track transit increase, we just pulled one of the proposed expansions as an example here. But these are the types of things we're wanting to try to make sure that we include as well, is the pre-existing plans that are already going to come online or plan to in the region. Another one I just wanted to mention was the Greenways and Blueways plan. This was something that was instrumental in. We were trying to look at how an improved bike infrastructure, increase in bike infrastructure would affect VMT in the region. And so this plan was a big help for that as well. So and then just again, sort of covering everything we've been working on this summer, and I recognize I am throwing a lot of information out for folks. Google has a lot of environmental energy data. It's Google EIE data. And so with our partners at ICLEI, we've been able to try to take advantage of that. So something that Google data provides is rooftop solar potential for residential buildings. So all of these things here, estimated annual generation, estimated job impacts, issues like capacity. Google data can also provide trip data for automobiles, biking and walking through its program. So this has been a huge help for us. And just wanted to kind of give, so you have to request access. I'm not entirely sure how Google handles this information, but we've been working, like I say, with our ICLEI partners on it. Just to give you an example of what this EIE data looks like, this is Boulder, Colorado, and you can see it's a map that just shows the amount of sunlight each rooftop in the region is getting, and the potential energy that can be generated from that. And so that's just one tool that we've been trying to take advantage of this summer. And so, so just to sort of recap on all of that we just ran through, we've been trying to add a lot of reduction strategies, which are just policy recommendations, into our plan. It's been a very time-consuming aspect of our climate action plan because we want to try to cast as wide a net as possible, but we are making progress on it. So, like I say, regional plans that we've studied tend to have a wider range of options than city plans, and for good reason. And so, like I say, it's a lot of information to run down, but it's been a good exercise, and we've really learned a lot this summer, trying to put as many plans together for our regional climate plan as we can. And so I just wanted to wrap up with a few slides on additional sections we're going to be adding and that we've been working on this summer. So we really wanted to include a section on industrial emissions. And so really what we mean by a section is just an overview of both the benefits that heavy industry provides and as well as the pollution effects to the region. So obviously the two big sources are steel and industrial rail. We do want to try to mention the importance that both of those industries have on the region and on the national economy as a whole. We wanted to do a thorough overview of pre-existing plans that these industry groups have already put in place. So for instance, U.S. Steel has a roadmap to 2050 for its entire corporate structure, which among other things includes a 20% reduction by 2030 and then being net zero by 2050. We want to look at how these broader plans will actually impact Northwest Indiana, and if they'll affect them at all. And then we wanted to do a pretty thorough going over of how different heavy industry groups can decarbonize. So we wanted to look into things like green steel, carbon capture, electrification, other issues like that. And so we wanted to really just sort of present it in a way of just sort of recommending to industry partners in the region how they can best reduce their emissions and reduce their footprint in Northwest Indiana. And so another section we're going to be adding is, I know Kathy's mentioned it, I know I mentioned it a little while ago, menus of policies for community type. So what we have a handful of different communities that we want to try to have a set list of high priority policies for. So just to run through those really quickly. So a stable bedroom community, an urban core with a decreasing population, a high growth ex-urban suburb, a coastal sort of vacation home area, a small rural town, an unincorporated agriculture area. We wanted to try to, place for everyone for their different types of communities they might find themselves in. We wanted to try to make sure that we list, here are some high priority actions that you and your community can be taking, in addition to a list of policies by sector of emissions. So that's something that we wanted as a regional entity to provide. And so just wanted to sort of touch on that. And then, like I mentioned, we wanted to have a section on federal financing and programming options. So with the Inflation Reduction Act passing, which presents the largest increase in sustainability investment in our nation's history. And that passage, along with when our climate plan is planning to be released, which is early next year, we want to try to, as best we can, include the resources that are passed in that legislation, as well as any other federal programs that communities can take advantage of. So including in things like the American Recovery Act, the bipartisan infrastructure bill, and really just provide an overview of programs and how to access them. So that's sort of what we've been working on there. And so to try to wrap up, and I know I've covered quite a lot. So just to sort of give you an idea of how we hope this fall will look as far as getting this plan done. So obviously the biggest thing is we want to finish the climate action plan draft by the end of 2022. And so to do that, we want to, the important things on the path towards that include completing a list of high priority reduction strategies, completing a regional hazard assessment, and a list of adaptation strategies that folks can take to respond to those climate hazards. Completing a monitoring section, which is just a section that'll outline how best to take stock of how progress is going in the region. And then, like I mentioned just a minute ago, we want to try to complete that federal financing section as well. And so, that's really what we're working on this fall, is really just we've made a lot of progress on a lot of different areas, and now between now and January of next year, we're hoping to go a long way towards completing our plan. So that is basically what I had planned to kind of give you guys an overview of today. And I know that I mentioned, I know I went over quite a lot. And so if anyone has any questions, we'll answer them as best we can right now. But I will absolutely try to track down any questions or go back over any other slides that you all want me to, because I recognize that we did cover quite a lot there. So.
Thank you so much, David. And this is Jen. I just want to chime in that we have allocated plenty of time for question and answer here. So I do want to just welcome you to, I know it was a lot of information, so I welcome you to pose your questions. I would propose a couple of different ways to do that. I think my preferred method, just in terms of so that we can make sure we document all of the questions and follow up with any, information we need to provide. If you could type your comments in the chat, I think that's my preferred question, or my preferred format. Since we do have a group here, rather than people just kind of unmuting, if people could, as an alternative, raise your hand if you would prefer to voice your question, that's perfectly acceptable as well. And so we will just take questions as we see them appear in the chat and as we see hands raised. Kathy, I see your hand raised. Do you have anything else to add just to kind of our question and answer format as well?
Yeah, just before people start on the Q&A as they're formulating questions, I just wanted people to give a little bit of thought to what we're going to actually be doing after the Q&A. So as you're thinking, here's a question for you. When we go into our breakout sections, we told you we would have 3 different groups that you would be able to choose. I don't have the poll function turned on, and we just had a little slip up with technology. We don't have breakout rooms, but we're a very resilient team, very cooperative, and we have a plan to address it. But what I will need to know is who would like to join what group. So if you can put that in chat, and why don't we just remind people what the groups will be. Kathy Luther, can you say a little bit about the vulnerability, what you'll be addressing?
Yeah, we talked very briefly about the vulnerability of different communities to our major climate risk impacts, which are high heat and flooding. And so I thought it'd be useful to talk through that in more detail. People have questions about their own communities or how much of that we should do at the regional scale versus the local scale. That kind of was the intent of that conversation. And we can actually dig into that tool that IU has provided and show people how it can help them.
Thank you. And I will say David and Jen are going to be leading a session as well, and that will be on reduction strategies. So you're going to have a chance to go like even deeper in that breakout session, beyond our general question time. But Dave and Jen, do you want to say anything? David, sorry. And Jen, do you want to say anything more about reduction strategies, what you'd hope to address in that breakout?
Really, I mean, for me, I just want to try to be as helpful as I can on that section, because I think that's going to be probably like one of the most, if not the most important section for folks, and folks are going to have a lot of questions on that. And so really, I don't mind trying to answer them as best I can, or trying to track down what they're looking for. But yeah, I mean, we're trying to, we just like necessarily won't be able to include every single reduction strategy in our plan. So we're going to try to stick to ones that we know would have a pretty significant impact. But beyond that, just anything folks are curious about, because I feel like that was probably the most information dense part of my presentation. So just happy to do any follow-up necessary.
Thank you. And again, we're going to have general Q&A time, but this is just for anybody who really wants to go deep on, reduction. They could go to that breakout. And if we don't have a lot of people popping in and saying, hey, I want to do this or that, we could try just staying in the general meeting. We do have a relatively manageable crowd today, but we promised it on the agenda, and I said it, verbally at the beginning. We do think the breakout rooms are an important feature just to allow all voices to be heard and, make sure we hear from everybody. So there's a third session, and that's me. That's actually on the community action and what I'm going to call just general resilience, because I feel like when we become more resilient as communities, we can, adapt and act on climate. We can do all kinds of things. So we have actually some things to celebrate. Connie and Kathy, who are on this call today, are working on an event for April 27th that they're calling Region Neighbors for Sustainability. They're hosting in Highland, and that's going to support groups that are forming their own sustainability, commissions, if it's a very formal thing, or just neighbors interested in sustainability topics. So that's one of the things that we'll be talking about in that group, along with an upcoming opportunity for us to do a climate action challenge that runs for 3 months, September through November. So anyway, if you can type in chat which one you want to join, or if you want to just vote for everybody stay in the same meeting, or you have no preference, that's fine. But let us know while we're queuing up questions for David, so we can just work through the logistics of what the breakout's going to be. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and mute, and thank you, Kevin, for letting us know. If everybody else could be like Kevin and tell us in the chat which group you want to join. Again, that's vulnerability with Kathy Luther, reduction strategies with David and Jen, and then community action with me. Thank you very much.
Yes, be like Kevin and let us know, because that'll really help us kind of plan the remainder of the meeting. That being said, while we wait for those to start trickling in, I did want to address just a couple of things that were in the chat during David's presentation. We did have a question that I think during Kathy's presentation we addressed, pretty well about where that reduction target came from. But again, we will be sharing some additional information after the meeting. It was asked if we would be sharing the slides and recording, and yes, we'd be happy to share the slides and recording. I'm continuing to kind of look through the rest of the chat questions that have come in. It does look like a lot of people are posting which room they'd like to go to, so we do appreciate that.
Jen, I wanted to mention, I know we've talked about this at some other meetings, and Dave didn't really touch on it. I believe we finally kind of have a method available to incorporate the conservation and forestry actions into the scenarios, but due to our division of labor to date, I have been working on the conservation part of the model, land use part of the model, and he's been working on the other part of the model. We haven't put our two pieces together. So, but David knows how to do that now. So, again, I mean, we do have, that information is available to us. We now have a plan to put it together, but we haven't done it yet. So, I just want to manage expectations on that particular topic. So, for example, we know that between 2011 and 2016, the forests we have absorbed about 1/3 of a ton of greenhouse gas per acre. During that same time period, the 2,900 acres that we converted from forest to developed land emitted 1.525 tons per acre. So the emissions from a conversion is 4 times higher than the sink value of the forest. Anyway, that's kind of, we had to figure out how to put that in a scenario for 30 years, but that's coming. Stay tuned for that.
Any other questions from David's presentation or from Kathy Luther's presentations? I'm not seeing a lot coming through in the chat. So, at this point, I would just welcome everyone to make sure we get your questions. If you're more comfortable unmuting and just asking your question, I think that would be acceptable at this point.
Speaking to David just asked a question about the urban core communities in the chat are not monolithic, and some of the neighborhoods are stable or growing. And that's one of the reasons why we are, for each kind of category, we would have a suite of options, right? And we would rely on the community and the residents of the community and the local government to know that right? So each community is a mosaic of all of those things. And so you'd have to, so I guess my point is that we're going to give you a menu and a suite, but the reason why we're not doing a climate action plan for every city and town is because it's more appropriate to do that at the local government level. So, and then, so yeah, a large community with a complicated mosaic might have to
Mhm.
do different things in different places. So,
And I think Kathy, something that I think our plan tries to do with understanding that is that we're going to be providing a list of policies based on like sector of emissions, in addition to, by community type, because like, no one community is going to fit the bill for some of those menus perfectly. You might be in a position to rapidly reduce like wastewater reductions or like your commercial energy reductions for like one section of a city or one section of a community. And so we wanted to have both there. We wanted to have, we didn't want to presume that this was the only list of options you were going to have if you maybe fit the bill of one type of community. We wanted to have a list of policies. So like if your community has a lot of potential to reduce transportation emissions or whatever it was, here's what we think are the 10 to 15 like high priority actions for that type. So again, just sort of like a resource for you to use there. But I think it's a really good point, something that we've thought a lot about, how to incorporate the fact that there's not going to be one size fits all for each community.
I was going to add, we have recently learned at NERC on the transportation side that there's a rulemaking in progress right now that will require us to have carbon reduction targets in our the whole transportation system. In the past, we only have to have targets for criteria pollutants like ozone. So that's going to be help us a lot to have a stronger regulation behind us. So we're staying tuned to see how that rule comes out.
I don't want to cut the questions off if they're still coming. It does seem to be slowing a bit. Can
Yep,
I?
I could make one more, if I could just make one more call for questions. I do appreciate that great comment, David, and the discussion around it. One last call for questions, and then I'm going to turn it over to Kathy for our next steps. And hearing none, take it away, Kathy.
Okay, so it seemed like the people who were opting in for the community action were already working together pretty tightly, and we'll all be connecting at that August 27th meeting that I already mentioned, which I will drop in the general chat later. So I think we only need 2 breakout rooms. What I'd like to propose is reduction strategy seems to be the biggest group. So why not let you all continue on here and keep the recording going? And then for the people who want to do to meet about vulnerability with Kathy Luther, we will host that on the Zoom link that I just posted in chat. So sorry for the inconvenience. You will need to actually go to a separate Zoom link, and then we'll all come back here together. And let's all be back here by, let's end our sessions by 20 minutes till the hour. And if you need a quick bio break or whatever, we want to all be reconvened back here by, or no, you know what, let's say 1/2 past the hour. Let's end our sessions at 1/2 past the hour, convene back here no later than 25 minutes till, and then we'll have, kind of a plenary session with people sharing findings from both of those breakout groups, and then a few announcements and next steps. So I hope that's clear for everybody. If you want reduction strategies, you just stay here. If you want vulnerability, you're going to click on the link that I just posted in chat. Is anybody confused or need more help? Okay, I'm going to go ahead and leave this one, and I will fire up the other Zoom.
For my convenience, do you have handy did you want to say something about Jamboard? Are we still using the Jamboard links?
Yeah, we are. I'll post that in there for you. David, you had
Okay.
it up just before, did you not? Okay, well, give
I
me,
can dig it out. I just thought you might have it handy.
yeah,
if
just
you don't-
juggling a few things. If you could
Yep,
get that,
I get
I'd
it.
appreciate it. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Okay, we'll give it just a few minutes for people to find their place.
Mhm.
And I did see that Renee, thank you to Renee, I'm not sure she's still with us, but she has posted a link to a Jamboard in the chat there. If we'd encourage you to click on that link so that you can view the Jamboard. I will serve as kind of the populator of that Jamboard. So if you're not comfortable using it, I will do my best to kind of capture your thoughts on those kind of sticky notes. But let me go ahead and see if I can kind of share that screen. Let's see. Can everyone see the Jamboard? So if the way that this works, just to kind of reiterate, it's pretty simple. Don't be intimidated by it. Admit someone. If you have kind of a thought that you want to share, a response to any of our questions or discussions, the way that you use this, if you click on that link that was shared in the chat to the Jamboard, you can click over here on this little icon that looks like a Post-it note, and I can write demo. Save, and then it populates your comment. So just wanted to share that. If there are any questions about the Jamboard, feel free to chime in with those. I'll delete that kind of demo one. But we can go ahead and get into it. We can either, you can start populating your ideas here, or it's a small enough group, you can unmute and just chime into the discussion and I'll help to capture it. But we would like to make note of everyone who participated in this group. You can post your own name if you'd like, or I can go ahead and type that in there for you. But the nature of this session is we just want to, are we in the wrong one, David? This says vulnerability self-assessment.
Well, I think so. Go up to, you see where it says 1-3 at the top banner? Click on the right arrow up there. This looks like a
there we
little
go.
flashcard. Yeah, click
Oh,
on
I
that.
see. It's all the same one. There we go.
Hop over.
There we are. Sorry, guys.
Yep.
Control reduction strategies. So in this session, we're just going to talk about different control and reduction strategies. Any kind of detailed questions that you might have for David, since he's kind of in the thick of this. Any suggestions that you have that you'd like to make sure that we explore in the framework. Go ahead and just chime in with those or populate them in the Jamboard. And as David just said, if you're in the Jamboard, you just want to go up to the top and go to page 2, which is our page. I'm just adding names of people who are in the room. If I could ask, I do see an email address, CT Perrin. Could you introduce yourself? If you're okay with me documenting your name.
Jennifer, that's my colleague, Kathy Perrin, Cathy. She's with Highland Neighbors for Sustainability.
Great.
Thank you. So I guess we can kind of just jump into it. Does anyone have, I do see that we have a few here from Highland Neighbors for Sustainability. Anything that you guys, I hear some comments coming in. I see some. I keep hearing that insulating buildings is a great reducer of energy. How could we encourage this? Yep, that's a great one. Yeah, that's a great point. And maybe that's something we can take back to NIPSCO to chat about some of their energy conservation programs and rebates. Certainly even talking to new builders, maybe realtors who are selling older buildings. That's a great one. Do you have any thoughts, David, from your what you've been looking into?
Yeah, so just a few. So it's a good idea that we want to try to keep top of mind. The low, and again, I know I really was kind of flying through a couple of those sections, but the policy that we modeled, the sample policy that we modeled, called like low income weatherization, really a big part of that when I was researching that policy was properly insulating and sort of like updating and making low income homes more energy efficient. So like insulation, updated windows, things like that. So it is a big policy, and it's something that can kind of go along any of the lead, enact, encourage paradigms if you want. You can, like, cities have done financial incentives or programs to try to get folks to upgrade their homes, or they can enact green building policies to try to make sure that any retrofits or new buildings are up to that sort of very energy efficient code. And so building insulation is absolutely of a piece with all of that. So but it's a really good one to shout out.
Yes, NIPSCO has programs like that they can set up from a no-cost weatherization appointment, home energy efficiency education, where someone will come out to their place of residence and or business to do a calculation as far as what can be done, as far as how much am I paying right now? How can I save $20 a month, for example?
That's great.
And it's for free, so.
That's always nice.
I have a question. May I go ahead?
Yes, please do.
So I live in Highland. Kathy and I live in Highland, and I guess I'd ask if you have any tips about how to approach our town council on carbon reduction. So, our group has been going on for 2 years now, and we have worked with the Parks Department on rain gardens in town. But I have to say that our council isn't exactly, I think some communities have elected leaders that are more sort of attuned to acting on this. And I would say that our leaders are not. And so I guess I'm asking, are there any tips for moving ahead with approaching a council that doesn't have this as a high priority?
Mm-hmm.
I do think that gets to, maybe this can be a cross-pollination between the community, kind of a community engagement or messaging group. And I do think it gets to, the nature of wording. We were having some discussion earlier about, if you use the word climate, is that off-putting to some people? Is that kind of the case, do you think, in your community?
With some, yes.
Yeah. And I think, for NERPC's take, we have opted to continue calling it climate action because we're very much aligned with the Indiana University, the model that they're using, and that's very well established. And, to differentiate it from other terms that are commonly used, like resiliency, the two means, different things. But that's not to say, depending on your community, if you do feel that that word climate is going to be divisive, what might resonate with them. And one idea that comes to mind that I think NIPSCO was kind of just alluding to about free programs is, the energy reduction or energy savings. Could things be maybe structured in that language rather than climate action? Just off the top of my head, might be an idea.
This is Ryan from Drive Clean Indiana. I think you have to meet people's expectations and what's important to them. And if they're not interested in,
Agreed,
a whole green climate, whatever you want to call better for the community actions, there's other opportunities that we've conducted within the last 2 years, from the 2 electric vehicle charging stations in downtown Highland, the LED street light replacement project that we got funding for them with, which at the end of the day, you look at 4 cents per mile versus 20 cents per mile for a gasoline powered car that gets 20 miles per gallon versus an electric car. And then if you're looking at the street light savings, that's going to bring down their electric. I'd have to go back and check, but it brought down their electric bill in downtown Highland significantly. So those are all things that can be done from a variety of different standpoints to not only improve their operations, but can lower greenhouse gases, electricity usage, gasoline usage, diesel usage, and so on. And that if we're coming at this from the right standpoint, you can meet what's important to them and have the conversation steered that way instead of just hugging trees and stuff.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, Brian, I would agree. My strategy with working with people who are maybe unconcerned about this topic is to find out what their goals are and try to align mine with it.
And we've done the fleet audits for the Town of Highland Police, and looking at how we can reduce a lot of their vehicle greenhouse gases is definitely a priority of that. But there has to be some buy-in from the political leaders on each local level of these communities to bring a variety of different opportunities for people to have access to alternative forms of transportation, cleaner burning fuels, and so on. And if it's not being developed here on the local level, you can also frame in the standpoint is, why are people going to want to live to this community? Is it a livable community? Can I walk? Can I drive? What can I do downtown instead of, everyone's moving out to Valparaiso? How can we keep them in Lake County? And that's just an example.
Yeah, that definitely does get to kind of the crosses between, kind of land use policy and things of that nature that I think are a little bit more in NERC's wheelhouse, at least in terms of planning perspective. Okay, well, I think were we to be back? I can't remember. David, did she say to have us back at 2:20? Was it? I suppose we'll see them come back in when they.
She said.
I guess that is a good way to do it.
She said 2:30, and then we would be back at 2:35 altogether.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Yeah, so we've still got plenty of time. I'm curious from anyone that we haven't heard from. I think this is a great kind of conversation thread that we're on about, messaging and how that might work. One idea that does occur to me is that, Ryan, you had mentioned some examples of communities that you had worked with that had recognized some of those cost savings. You know, so to kind of just hear in their own words about the cost savings, you know, to have maybe some speakers or case studies from those examples really kind of focused on the cost savings, because I think a lot of, you know, at the municipal level, you are dealing with those budget issues. Maybe that is one approach.
Absolutely. Being able to tell each story from a community perspective, at the end of the day, that's going to hit home to everyone. Because if their neighbors are doing it, each community can do it too. Because each municipality thinks, oh, but we're different. And usually that's not the case. And being able to say, hey, this is not just stuff that's going on in California. This is happening in our own backyards. So that's a great way to frame it, is doing these little summaries or some presentations on it to the different communities, and having I don't want to call them white papers, but just some presentations and summaries related to each project would definitely help out.
Yeah. I think that was something that was so, you know, digging through a lot of these types of plans over the summer. Something that really stood out to me with Kansas City's plan was that, like, every time they listed one of these like basic building code or transportation policy or whatever it was, they had plenty of examples of Missouri cities or Kansas City's communities in their area that had enacted identical policies, to kind of serve as a springboard for folks. So Ryan, I think I just think that's a really good observation, to sort of ground it here and make it feel more real.
So like another good example is the city of Hobart. They have about 21 CNG vehicles, and most of them are their waste and recycling collection for the city. And at the end of the day, they're paying 65 cents per diesel gallon equivalent. What that means is when other communities and other diesel fleets were paying above or around $4 per gallon, city of Hobart was paying 65. And we've kind of used, 65 cents per gallon. And we've used that as a springboard for other communities to get into compressed natural gas from an operations and fuel savings perspective. And then, well, now the compressed natural gas that they're running is 90% cleaner than current diesel model year 2022 vehicles. So when you take that all into consideration, it's a win-win that checks off the triple bottom line.
I'm curious about, since this is a regional and deals with areas outside of the cities, anything about farming practices? I know that, I'm sorry, Eric Bird is not in this, because I know that Shirley Hines Land Trust has some involvement in encouraging better farming practices, which would be better in terms of greenhouse gas emissions.
Yeah, I think we definitely need to consider, since this is regional, looking at, you know, land uses outside of the, you know, the incorporated areas, and, you know, a number of land use issues. One is, I think someone already referred to discouraging sprawl, and that having an impact. I know that the way that the model is set up, and David can correct me here because I'm not as into it as he is, but I believe that there is a land use sector category that lumps together agriculture and forested land. A little bit clunky because, you know, I think that generally without best practices, agriculture is a source and forestry would tend to be a sink under most conditions, but there are definitely practices, as you said, and I think Eric Bird would be definitely one we would consult on that, to reduce emissions from agriculture, to keep and preserve agricultural land. David, you can probably speak more knowledgeably than I can about whether or not there are specific practices or reduction strategies that can be included for agricultural areas or other areas outside of the municipal boundaries.
So it is something that we're hoping to include. I don't know if so one of the things that Kathy Luther had mentioned was she was wanting to try to update the forecast, the emissions inventory and forecasting to go region wide. One of the trickiest things that us and we were relieved to know most regional plans have is how to incorporate land use. It is done, but because it's hard to get just one snapshot of land use for an entire region. You have some areas that are obviously very agricultural heavy, other areas that are more developed, other areas that are forested. But it is something that is included and something that Kathy Luther and Kathy really had identified is that the same software program we're using, it's called ClearPath. They have a specific tool to try and incorporate any sort of sequestration that might take place from the forest land in your area, as well as other land use aspects of it. So we're still sort of in the process of adding that to our plan. And again, that's sort of one of those areas where, like, being a regional plan, we're kind of on the frontier of figuring out how to include that into a plan. But we intend to. I think we intend to have a land use section and include those policies. And I think it's a really good point to raise as well. And to what degree local groups can control that sort of policy, depending on their level of control, we could obviously take it in the direction of a industrial section, which is, something we're going to include in our industrial emissions section, is just the fact that so much of that is regulated at the federal and state level. So what we're doing is almost sort of like a recommendation to those groups. So it may take that form, but it's a good point to raise, because it's something that regional plans have to deal with a lot more than city plans have had to. And so that's one of the things that's taken us some time to kind of try to get online. But short answer, yes, we're going to hopefully include that into our model as well.
Great. We have about 2 minutes left until our time that we're sort of designated to conclude this group and give people a break if they want, or people can continue talking. But I would like to ask, does anyone feel comfortable? It's always good if the spokesperson who reports out to the group is not the same one as the person kind of taking the notes. Is anyone interested in kind of reporting out what we talked about to the group when we reconvene? And I do see some information in the chat from Victoria regarding this topic of land use. That's great. Thank you.
This is Ryan again. I just want to, I don't know how to say this in politically correct way. I just don't want to point the dirty end of the stick on the steel mills, because they bring a lot of economic prosperity to our region as a whole. And what they're doing from an arc electric furnace standpoint is really revolutionary. And, that's the best form of recycling that is currently available right now. And they're doing what they can do to get better. And, 99% of all slag is utilized in some other construction, whether it be asphalt, roads, or concrete mix, is recycled back into another product. Yes, it is a heavy carbon industry. However, not only Northwest Indiana, but the United States GDP depends on what's going on here on the lakeshore for a whole variety of industries.
Yeah.
I think anything that we can do to offer and work with these heavy duty equipment fleets, and both on-road and off-road, to offer different forms of fuel usage is great. There's a whole opportunity coming up with the different emission control levels for new diesel vehicles that is going to make a lot of the transit operators that are still having issues with 2013 engines with DEF and DPF a whole heck of a lot harder. And if they're not going to be conforming to go to a cleaner fuel, that their operations are going to be exponentially impaired. And I think it's important that all of the different contractors that either have a local or a contract with a state or federal entity in our area, that they have some form of a climate initiative that they're doing to reduce their carbon footprint in their operations. And I'm not trying to say we should outlaw diesel by year 2030, like out on the West Coast. But there's different things that we can do from a monetary standpoint to help our emergency response vehicles, our transit vehicles in the area that are funded with local dollars to go this way versus, the saying I hate the most. This is the way that we've always done it. And getting out of that mentality is a huge, huge win. And if any way that we can provide the education, demonstration, and hey, it's going down in this Hoosier city, it's a win-win.
I think that's a great way I think that's a great idea and a great way to frame all of that. I think the point you raised about the industrial section is so important because, I think the contrast of the emissions profiles was definitely pretty stark, but really, our industrial section, I really want it to have I really want the tone that we want to strike with that to be working in partnership and to just sort of spell out as clearly as we can all of the benefits and also why it is that emissions are like that, or why the industry might be small c conservative and how you don't want to mess with the process of steel that has built good steel for 50, 60 years and is a certain standard that is what the entire rest of the economy is based, that commodity is what everything else is built off of. And so you don't want to really mess with that process. So just that's just one example of how we want to try to be as deliberate as we can in our framing, and as thorough as we can, and like how this industry is relating to carbon reductions and how we might what steps they could also take. So all that is to, and your point about alternative fuels for transportation, I totally agree. I'd love to connect on that actually, because I think that's something that should be utilized in our plan. So yeah, looks like
Right. I do.
I'm getting pinged a bunch, Jen. I think our group our
Yep,
other group is
everyone's coming back in, so I'm gonna
filtering
stop my
back in.
share and we'll wait for folks to trickle back in.
Great.
Our vulnerability group just broke up, so they should be back any second.
Thank you. While we're waiting for everybody to reconvene, I wonder if I could just take a moment to celebrate the group a little bit who didn't get their own breakout session. Connie, would you be willing to just maybe give like a 30-second or 60-second mention of what that event is on the 27th, and I'll put the link in chat. Would that be okay?
Yes, thank you. So our Highland Sustainability Group is hosting, with the help of Kathy Sipple and my colleague Kathy Perrin, who's on this meeting, an event on Saturday, August 27th, called Region Neighbors for Sustainability. And we're inviting people from other communities to come and hear what we have two speakers, hear what two speakers have to say about sustainability commissions. One is Andy Johns Davis, who is a member of the Michigan City Sustainability Commission. Michigan City is the only city that or town that in Northwest Indiana in the 3-county area that has a sustainability commission. And this event is to get people from other communities to learn what that commission does from Andy. And also the other speaker is Alex Bazan, who's a sustainability professional. Right now, he's working with the city of South Bend, their sustainability department. So he'll talk about what his work is like and what kinds of projects he works on. The whole point of this event will be to get people from these neighboring communities to start thinking together about how to work on sustainability issues in their local communities, and in particular, with the end goal of going to their town or city councils and asking those councils to create a sustainability commission. We think that is probably one of the best ways to work on the community level on reducing emissions and developing a climate action plan. It will help engage the community and it will help the councils to see that the community is engaged. So Saturday, August 27th, 10 until noon, it will take place at Promise You Art House, 8830 Kennedy Avenue.
Thank you, Connie. I did put the link in the chat and I did flash it on screen there for a little bit. So anyway, thanks for all their organizing efforts. And I'll pop another link in chat too. There's going to be like a climate.
I'm sorry, but I might say that it's an outdoor event and it's a free event.
Okay, again, full details on that link. But anyway, I'm going to turn back over. We're going to have recap from our group on vulnerability. David, are you willing to be our spokesperson? We kind of volunteered you.
Yeah, call it being voluntoed.
Cool.
No,
I'll show our notes on screen while you're talking, so you'll have some
perfect.
visual.
Actually, that's great because I was going to ask for that.
Yeah.
We spent a lot of time working in the Hoosier Resiliency Index, which, if I'm not mistaken, is hosted by IU. We spent our time looking at the conditions in Valparaiso and Gary as two examples. The discussion went into things like areas of vulnerability and how certain areas are more vulnerable to weather conditions. We actually went to the scale of actually talking about conditions on certain corridors. Airport Road came up, for instance, in the northwest section of Gary. We actually spent a lot of time talking about how our region, being a coastal community, is susceptible to these changes and the economic impact. Thank you very much for increasing the size of that, because that's exactly what I was reading from. Cities and towns, there's an economic impact on that. And I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Kathy, NERC has at least come up with the idea of looking at the vulnerability of infrastructure. She brought up specifically transportation infrastructure and how flooding on a corridor not just affects SOV travel, but could also affect transit travel. If we can't run a route or have a detour route around a neighborhood because of its being susceptible to weather conditions. I think the Jamboard does a great job of digesting what we talked about. So you feel free to take a look at that even when I'm done talking, which I am, unless I miss something.
Thank you. Kathy, did you want to add anything, or would you like me to show the resiliency index? I put that on in the chat if people want that tool.
Yeah, that is a great tool. I really, I'm probably going to bookmark it on my desktop.
Kathy, you're muted right now. Okay, Kathy, you got the floor. Okay, weird. You're unmuted, but I can't hear you. Can others hear her?
Oh,
Nope.
okay.
I can't hear her.
Yeah, you were fine before.
Okay. I don't know what happened.
Oh. Weird. Okay, well, while she's figuring that out, I just want to say we did record that session, so that will also be uploaded to the NERC website along with your session. So I'm sorry you're having trouble, Kathy. Maybe we can come back to you.
Okay.
Do we hear Kathy? Was that you?
Yeah, I wasn't sure what I was supposed to do.
No, that's not Kathy Luther.
not
She
Kathy.
dropped out.
Oh, good, because I was completely confused.
Oh, I'm sorry, Kathy Parent. Okay. Oh, I'm so sorry.
I'm going to
Okay.
mute myself again.
Sorry about that. Okay, Kathy Luther is rejoining. Sorry about that. Okay, Kathy Luther. Kathy, are you able to, do you have audio now?
Okay, I'm back. Can you hear me?
Yes, great.
Yay!
I can hear you.
I just think overarching, it's kind of, I think, important that we keep the, I want to say like the keep the line, right? So there's a climate impact, and then whether or not we're vulnerable to the climate impact has to do with our geography and our built environment, and then then that vulnerability may or may not lead to risk based on the resilience of the community. So that's kind of the through line, and we need to consider the risks, like more mosquitoes, which has a health risk, like, and tie it back together through that chain, right? From the climate thing, which is flooding, to the keep things in their right buckets, so you make sure you have your cause and your effect in the right order, I think.
Thanks. Anybody else from our group want to speak? Or is there anybody from the other group that has questions about what this group discussed that they want to ask anybody? I think we're a small enough group that we could just do popcorn. Okay, I'm not seeing anybody. So should we turn it over to the reduction group? Did you all elect a spokesperson, David?
No one really volunteered to be the spokesperson, and
No?
I was somewhat the note taker, so I would still welcome anyone from our group if they would like to be spokesperson to chime in and go for it. Otherwise, I think David has volunteered too, since I was the note taker. That might be a better fit.
Yeah, and if anyone's, I know I've talked a lot this meeting, so if anyone else wants to chime in with their thoughts from our discussion, I'd certainly welcome them. But yeah, we really we had a really good discussion where folks just were sort of bringing up and adding to the conversation, just sort of like, well, I know that this strategy might be really effective, and I've heard that this is a good strategy, or this is a good strategy. So for instance, we began by discussing some NIPSCO weatherization programs that are in place where they'll come out free of charge. And we had a really good discussion on taking advantage of those programs. That's something that we've included in some of the modeling we've done over the summer, is increasing like energy efficiency of homes, things like that. One of the things that we spent a lot of time talking about, we were sort of like a mixture of reduction strategy and messaging group. We spent a lot of time, folks were having some really thoughtful back and forth about, what if a city council or, oversight board just doesn't, for any number of reasons that we all know of, that we've all heard of before, doesn't really want to prioritize climate or sustainability. And so that was where, and I want to try to give him a shout out. I think it was Ryan from Drive Clean Indiana, and some other folks just had some really great conversations about how best to present these sorts of policy changes, and really getting into what a lot of folks would call the co-benefits of policies. So like the energy savings, the health benefits, whatever it might be, and trying to attack it from that angle. Some really good conversations on that. And then we sort of veered into another really good deep kind of meaty topic for reduction strategies, which was land use, and specifically agricultural land use. That was a really good sector to kind of shout out in this section, because that's something that a lot of these plans, these sustainability climate plans, when they're done at the city level, it's not as big of a concern, but certainly the farther you zoom out, the more that sort of land use really comes into play. And so we were able to talk about ways that Kathy Luther and I have discussed trying to incorporate that into our climate plan, recommendations we want to try to make sure that we make. And then we had a really good conversation on alternative fuels and the potential that alternative fuels and other ways to sort of reduce the carbon intensity of vehicle fleets. And something that I think was really important that kind of affected a lot of that conversation and all of our conversations was that, it's really important to ground these proposals and these ideas, especially when folks think of them as new and radical and like, oh, we don't do that sort of thing. There are communities all over Indiana and all over the Midwest that are taking advantage of so many of these different sorts of policy frontiers because of the different benefits that they add. And so trying to ground that, again, sort of merging into messaging and reduction strategy, but how you try to present that and sell that to folks and say, oh, well, heck, if this community that's right down the road is implementing a weatherization policy or something like that, then that's something that we could easily do. And so that was sort of where we focus a lot of our conversation, was a few different policies, but also the messaging around how you sell those policies. And I think we have a lot of ideas that I know I want to follow up on. And I think we had some really good conversation, I thought.
Thank you. Any other members of that group want to chime in? Were there finer points that, are bubbling up for you, or you didn't get to record on the Jamboard? Maybe while you're thinking, I would love to just talk about that one that said, tips on how to approach town council on carbon reduction, and kind of give a shout out for, like Connie's efforts in organizing the Highland Neighbors for Sustainability. They've been organized now for 2.5 years. Valparaiso, where I live, just had their second meeting last month, and Carl from Drive Clean came and did such a great presentation that now people who attended that meeting looked at the math of an upcoming tax increase that's being proposed for our trash collection and said, wait a minute, here's this, grant that we can get, or there are these federal monies where we can get EV, trash collection vehicles. So they've done the math, they've had the research based on, all this connection that we're doing and connecting the dots and sharing tools and sharing strategies. And so now, they're collecting input from citizens and inviting people to come to the town council meeting. So it's not just one person, or it's not the crazy tree hugger, it's the math. And Valpo did come up with an acronym that's called INVEST. So that stands for Indiana Valparaiso Environmental Stewardship Task Force. So we are, really willing to look for the low-hanging fruit. That's the co-benefits, what actually saves money, doing the right thing for the planet, and if there's grant funds available that are timely, let's lean into that. So
One
that,
last thing, this is Jen from that group, and one last thing, David did a wonderful job recapping all of that, but one thing I did want to kind of just reiterate was that there were shared some examples, I think from Drive Clean, of local examples and dollars and cents examples of cost savings that our local communities had realized, concrete numbers of how much money they had saved, especially during this period of high fuel costs. So I think that's one great idea that I took away is that, and I think David mentioned it as well, is that some of these regional frameworks have included like a fact sheet or case studies from local communities and the results that they've had. So I just thought that was a great idea to give local examples where people are already doing some of these things and they're already saving money. So if we don't want to frame it all necessarily around tree hugging or climate, there are some ways that we could include case studies and show real economic or other co-benefits from these things.
Did you guys talk about, I know there's a couple of, I noticed there's a couple of sticky notes about residential energy efficiency. And I know that NIPSCO's NiSource has worked on that before. Is there like a way to have a case study about that? Like I'd like, I think, how effective are the incentives that have been tried? What hasn't been tried? That I think that would be useful. To have in the when we do the policy initiatives. I don't know if you talked about that at all, the effectiveness of some of the different things. Like
We
if we're
did, I agree. And I see someone trying to raise their hand. Is that Kathy?
Yes, I years ago, I had an energy audit done on my house and NIPSCO came out and they gave me CFL bulbs and they audited this and they gave me a thing for a faucet thing, so to reduce my water. And I get mail from there every month telling me that I am the most efficient neighbor on my block. But I don't know how, and I know they are trying very hard, but not everybody is doing it. And I don't know how we can get more people to do this, because I think this is like low hanging fruit if we could just get people to do it.
Well, I've been inspired to get somebody from NIPSCO to come talk at my church, both for energy savings at the church group and also so that parishioners can learn the benefits and maybe they will call NIPSCO to come look at their house too, or just get some good ideas.
thank you. I would love to just volunteer that if somebody did want to take on that specific project, like how to engage more people around that specific strategy. There's a really interesting opportunity coming up that I'm willing to lead. I've already actually signed up as a Northwest Indiana team. There's an International Climate Action Challenge that begins August 31st and runs for 3 months. So if those were metrics that we could share and just promote those existing, programs, we could, hopefully get some kind of baseline data, see how many more people implemented, certain bulbs or, these kinds of things. So I'll put the link in chat. If anybody wants to join me, simply join and you say you want to join the Northwest Indiana team, or if you want to join one in your city or for your particular company, that's totally fine too. But I think that's just one concrete way that we can do and begin, a challenge that begins with some metrics that will set us up well to enter that engagement period when we start next year. So I think that's the end of our formal agenda, Jen, is that right? We wanted to say what our next meeting date was going to be. And then I also, as part of our, quality metrics, we want to try to be getting better and better. You can put in chat, or if you feel more comfortable, you can, email, you can respond to the email that invited you to this. Or Jen, are you willing to be the NERC email?
Yes.
Okay. Do you want to say your email right now if people want to give response or be added?
Yes, I'm Jay Birchfield at nerpc.org and I'll type it in the chat.
Thank you very much. And I'm happy, I don't have like a Earth Charter Indiana email that's convenient, but you can hit me up at Kathy at NWIregionresilience.org. that will reach me, and I'd be happy to talk to you about anything that, we've been discussing. So thank you. If you want me to contact you, somebody has just put their contact info in chat. I'll definitely follow up with you. So that's great. Jen, do we have the info on our next meeting?
Yes, our next meeting will be Thursday, September 15th, 2022 from 1 o'clock until 3 o'clock. And I am going to paste that Zoom information into the chat. I will also be sending both it has been sent out in a previous email via Constant Contact, but I will be sending that date in our meeting materials when we send out the notes and the recording, which we will be sending. I'll also be sending a Outlook calendar invitation to everyone on this list. And I'm pasting it in the chat right now.
Thank you. And if you wouldn't mind, just, again, you can drop us in chat. How are you leaving the meeting? Was this informative for you? You can tell us what you think went well. You can give us a tip for what you think went better. And again, if you're too shy to put it in chat, you can send it to me privately, or you can send it to Jen or to me via email. But we really appreciate your investment in this process. Again, we're pretty groundbreaking here in Northwest Indiana. It's the very first regional one. So I feel like we're getting there together with this, brain trust that we've got assembled. So anything else, or anybody else just want to unmute and say what's going on for you? David says, great meeting. Thanks the entire team for the agenda and format. Thank you. Thanks to Kathy, is wonderful. Great. Okay, well, I think we might miraculously be done 4 minutes early, which would be a first. Kathy Luther, is there anything that you want to weigh in on, or anything we've forgotten?
Thank you so much for participating and giving us your thoughts, because obviously we can sit in here and talk to ourselves all the time, but getting the input is really valuable. And thank you.
This is a bit random, but Kathy mentioned our coaching that we've gotten on diversity and inclusion, and I was able to connect our coach to a local representative of the Potawatomi Potagan tribe, because she had some questions about land acknowledgements, and now those two are connecting and strengthening their process for both the Chicagoland area and for our area. So that was kind of a cool outcome. I don't know how that will layer in or be part of what we do, but we are learning a lot, and a lot of connections are being made along the way. So thank all of you for being part of that learning and the connection as well. Okay, Kathy, are we officially concluded?
Yes, I think we can safely conclude. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Take care.
Everyone.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.